So good morning, everybody. I'm Kay Hall and welcome to this first public UK Squirrel Accord webinar of 2023. I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone, including Darren, that was involved in Saturday's Red Squirrel Appreciation Day. Lots of fantastic communications, including the launch of the New England Red Squirrel Action Plan. But today our focus for this webinar is on Wales, and we are joined by Welsh Assembly member Darren Millar, who is also the Welsh Red Squirrel Species Champion. A huge welcome to Darren, who I'm speaking to momentarily, but just a few bits of housekeeping to start. Thank you to everyone that submitted questions for Darren during registration. If there are any further questions during the course of the webinar, please put them in the Q&A function so I can keep track of them easily. But do please use the chat function at any general conversation or comments. With that said, I think we'll just launch into the webinar. Thanks, Darren, again for joining us. Do you just want to start off by introducing yourself and your role?
Yeah, sure, Kay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. So I've been a member of the Senedd, or the Welsh Parliament as it's called now, since 2007. And I'm currently serving my fourth term there for the beautiful constituency of Clwyd West, which is smack bang in the centre of the North Wales coast. It's a great place to live, but my favourite constituents are constituents that don't make any complaints, never contact my office. They just crack on day to day, and they are the red squirrels of Clwyd Forest, which is just down the road from my office here in Abergele. And back in 2016, the Wildlife Trusts in Wales decided to start an initiative with members of the Senedd and invited every one of us to become a species champion. And we didn't know which species would be chosen for each of us. One of my colleagues got the common toad, someone else got some strange woodlouse. Much to my amusement, the only Liberal Democrat in the Senedd was given the brown trout. But I was given a certificate to say that I'd been appointed as the species champion for the red squirrel, and that overjoyed me, not only because red squirrels are obviously, you know, an iconic image of wildlife in Britain, but because they're super cute, they're furry. Everybody loves to see a red squirrel. But unfortunately, too few of us have the opportunity to do that now. So I set out from that point to learn more about red squirrels and conservation work that was being done here in Wales. And it's been a wonderful journey so far with all of the individuals that I've met along the way.
That's fantastic, Darren. So you kind of hit the jackpot with your species championing.
I certainly did. And I was even given a badge. It was extremely bushy. It was like a sort of basil brush type thing to wear on my lapel for the day, having been awarded this unique and beautiful creature. But look, you know, that was just the start of a journey. You know, I knew a little bit about red squirrels from meeting a guy called Craig Shuttleworth, who I'm sure some of you know, back in 2007, in my very first year as a member of the Senedd. I took the opportunity to meet him down in Clwyd, and he was telling me a little bit about the demise of the red squirrel population there. And but it really wasn't until 2016, in this species champion moment, and I suddenly realized, you know, I had an epiphany really. Look, I can do something for these individuals. I'm used to working for people. I can also work to promote biodiversity and to support these gorgeous creatures.
Fantastic. Can you just give us a quick overview of red squirrels and their conservation in Wales?
Yeah, so obviously, like most parts of the UK, we've had a problem in Wales for the past 100 and odd years or so, because grey squirrels were introduced during the Victorian era, and unfortunately some of those were released into the wild, some escaped into the wild. And because they're bigger and brasher than the cute little red squirrels that we had in Wales at that time, they dominated the habitats of red squirrels, and they began to compete for food. And of course, because they're bigger and faster and stronger, unfortunately, the balance began to tip in their favour. And of course, we've lost habitat as well, unfortunately, deforestation, a loss of traditional woodland as well in Wales hasn't helped. But the other thing that these grey squirrels brought was squirrelpox, dreadful disease, which our native squirrel population just had no exposure to. And as a result of that, significant numbers began to die. So as a result of all of that problem caused by the introduction of this non-native grey squirrel, we saw a huge reduction in the number of in the number of reds in Wales, and just a small handful were living still on Anglesey at that time, in and around the Clwyd forest area. This is back in the 80s, and a smattering in mid Wales too, in these little sort of islands, if you like, around the country that were more difficult for the greys to get to. Back in '88, then a young guy came along, and he had a vision of an Anglesey that was free of grey squirrels and was a stronghold of the Reds. His name was Craig Shuttleworth. I've already mentioned him. And it was largely as a result of the efforts that he initiated at that time, along with the Red Squirrels Trust in Wales, that they began a programme of conservation on the island in order to eliminate the grey population and try to restore the native red squirrels and give them an opportunity to fight back, if you like, against these American cousins. And the incredible thing is that, with the support of people at the Welsh Mountain Zoo that are part of this national breeding programme, that's also in my constituency, by the way, just down the road in Clwyd Bay, that project has been extremely successful. So it took a few decades. 2013, they managed to eliminate what they thought was the last grey squirrel on the island. In 2015, Anglesey was declared a grey squirrel free zone. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't try to invade from time to time by crossing the two bridges that connect the island to the mainland, or even trying to swim across the Menai Straits. But since that time, it's been this place in Wales. It's the only place in the in the country that has this status as a grey squirrel free zone. And because of the success of that project, in the way that they managed to reintroduce more squirrels, the way that they managed to improve the gene pool by getting a mix with other native reds in other parts of the country, it then inspired Craig and others with different partners to take a look at how they could begin to increase the number of red squirrels in and around the Clwyd forest just down the road from me in Denbighshire and Conway. And that work is still going on. There's now a thriving but small red squirrel population there. It is having a fight back. Alongside that, they've been also reintroducing the pine marten to parts of the country. Now, people will say, well, why on earth would you have pine martens running around near squirrels? Aren't they just hungry and eat all squirrels? Well, the truth is that they are an actual predator for our reds, but because grey squirrels are larger, it's a more attractive prey for the pine marten. So there have been some trials in and around the sort of northwest of Wales, just off the island of Anglesey, and also in the Clwyd forest, where pine martens have been released. And what seems to be happening is that they are keeping the grey squirrel population in check. So, of course, they will still have red squirrel as prey, but they seem to love to feast on the tasty flesh of the grey squirrel, which is much to my contentment. That's a bit of an overview. I think the reckoning was a few years ago, they've got about 1,000 squirrels on Anglesey now, 1,000 reds. Of course, that population goes up and down, and we've been concerned about squirrelpox of late, but pretty good. So far,
it's one of those, Anglesey is one of those fantastic conservation success stories, isn't it? And they seem to be kind of coming out onto the mainland now as well.
That's right. So, as much as the Greys try to invade from time to time, like the Normans, we do have the Reds making this fight back. And in fact, they've even been found as far as Conway, just down the road across the coast. So they're making 30-mile treks to the mainland. And of course, it's difficult to see a red in its native broadleaf woodland. So for everyone that's seen, you can bet your bottom dollar there are a few more out there that have done this exploratory work and scouting in order to find new habitat that they can populate.
Definitely. Thank you, Darren. And since you became the species champion for red squirrels, what activities, what actions have you been taking?
Well, it's been a great and interesting journey. So one of the first things I did after I was appointed as a Squirrels champion was to contact Craig and to find out what the current situation was. So he took me on a visit to Anglesey, and we had a look around, went to see if we could spot some reds that day. We couldn't. It was just one of those days. But we also had a very interesting meeting over in Bangor, where he set out some of the challenges, the legal challenges, if you like, the legislative challenges that red squirrel conservation was facing. And the biggest of those challenges, Kay, was not necessarily money, although of course money is needed to undertake conservation work. It wasn't even volunteers. They seem to be doing a great job in attracting volunteers. I'm sure it'd be more difficult to attract volunteers to support the woodlouse population, but it was very easy to get volunteers who wanted to throw themselves behind these gorgeous red squirrels. But the one big problem that he told me about was that there was a problem with the Forestry Act. And he said that the Forestry Act was causing trees to be felled in red squirrel habitat without any considerations to the impact of that tree felling on the red squirrel population, or indeed any biodiversity at that time. And he told me about some of the plans to start felling trees in places on Anglesey, which were very important for red squirrels. And I thought, well, this can't be right. Why is it possible that trees can be felled without any proper consideration? Surely we've got agencies and the government agencies that are able to do something to intervene to protect these things. But lo and behold, after checking the legislation, it was very clear that that was not the case. So Craig and I began to chat about the need to change this law. And I said, well, look, let's start a campaign. I'll start asking some questions. I'll start writing to Welsh government ministers to see whether there's any appetite to change the law. And at that time, I have to say, Kay, whilst there was an appreciation and sympathy for the point that we raised, it was regarded as not a priority by the Welsh government. And they indicated that they had no intention of changing the law. So that meant we had to adopt a different strategy. And that different strategy included garnering the support of the public, the various wildlife organisations as well, in order to trigger a petition. And that petition went to the Senedd. It had many tens of thousands of signatures. And because we'd been laying the groundwork, and I'd been being a pest to ministers for such a long time, it sort of helped to pave the way for a more positive response once that petition was considered by the Welsh Parliament. So just to explain to everyone who's taking part in this webinar, here in Wales, we have a petition system, and it means that any members of the public can get a petition together and present it to the Petitions Committee in the Senedd, in the Welsh Parliament. And that Petitions Committee discusses every single petition that comes through the door. And what happens is when a petition gets 5,000 signatories or more, it then is required to have a debate in the Senedd, on the floor of the Senedd. And the Petitions Committee is able to prepare a report in advance of that debate, making a recommendation. And the recommendation that they made was to support the calls which I had been making, which Craig had been making, which these petitioners had been making, to change the law in order to protect red squirrels and other important parts of our wildlife when tree felling licenses were being issued. So it was a real tribute, if you like, to the hard work that Craig had been doing for such a long time, and the Red Squirrels Trust and the Clwyd Squirrels Trust were telling me that the law needed to change for. So that recommendation was received, and incredibly, the Welsh government, in its response to that debate, confirmed that they were prepared to change the law. So as a result of that, the law now is in the process of changing, and it will mean better protections for red squirrels, better protections for other animals in our woodlands and forests across Wales.
That's really positive. Yes, that was one of the questions that came in, that did you feel the proposed Forestry Act amendments would support red squirrels? And I guess that has to be yes, because you tried so hard to get them.
Yeah, it's a resounding yes. And of course, we know that the law had changed in Scotland, some years before. And we were looking on in envy, really, Craig and I, thinking, okay, well, what triggered that debate? How did they have the discussion? What was the means of getting the law changed? And look, every government is always busy getting on with their agenda, their programme for government. And that means that they pack the legislative timetable with the laws that they have as a priority to pass. What happened with the red squirrel debate and the way that that was able to influence the law was that there was a piece of legislation coming through the Senedd, or that the Welsh government was preparing at that time, called the Agriculture Wales Bill. And it was on the back of that that we were able to piggyback this change in the law. And that bill is currently in its legislative process going through the Senedd right now. So it should get royal assent before the end of the year.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Well done. So the Senedd debate in 2020 showed widespread support for the red squirrel. Apart from the amendments to the Forestry Act, has it changed the situation for red squirrels in Wales, or has it developed the situation for red squirrels in Wales further?
Yeah, I think what has happened was, we had our first debate on red squirrels back in 2017, when I was drawn from the hat to have a debate on the subject of my choice. And I thought, you know what, we've never had a debate on red squirrels. I'm going to trigger one. So we had that. Then we had this other debate as well, following the petitions committee. And in addition to that, then, I was constantly firing in these questions and raising matters in the Senedd. But what all of that did was it flagged up an awareness that these squirrels needed some help. These animals needed some help if we were going to get an upper hand against the greys. And I think it sort of inspired the work that we were doing collaboratively across the board in Wales for the red squirrel. Sort of inspired other people to take more seriously their roles as species champions. So, you've got a handful of people who really take these roles seriously and are doing a great job at shouting up for their animals too. So the work that we did on reds has certainly had an impact beyond red squirrels. And it's also had an impact in that, people in the government, those who work in agencies that affect the management of our land, people like Natural Resources Wales, the equivalent in England would be the Forestry Commission. They are having to carefully consider, even though the law hasn't changed yet, they are now more carefully considering how they help to support the red squirrel population in the areas where they know they exist, in order to not have an adverse effect on those numbers. It doesn't mean, Kay, that we don't have battles. We do have battles. There have been proposals to chop down habitat on Anglesey, as recently as last year, and it's been a struggle. To persuade those decision makers that they should, adopt a different approach. And it's been very frustrating for me and for Craig and for everybody working with red squirrels. To see that permissions have been granted in a way that we wouldn't like. And sometimes those communications between the conservationists and the different government agencies can break down. They're on a better footing now. And, I'm really hoping that, with the continued friendships that have been established, the mutual trust and understanding, the investment that's flowing into conservation work still, that once this law change kicks in, that the wheels will have been sufficiently oiled already to make a massive difference for all animals and wildlife across the country.
Definitely, that would be great. And yes, in the UK Squirrel Accord, we're very thankful for, Natural Resources Wales and Welsh Government for being important signatories to the partnership.
Yeah, that's right. And, I'd say, we won't always agree with the government on different things, but where we can work cooperatively, we always get better outcomes. And I think, this work around this legislative change, the investment that they're putting in as a Welsh government to the Red Squirrel Action Plan, and the way that they are listening more, if you like, to the voice of conservationists in Wales, really has helped. Wales was the first country as well to declare a nature emergency. And I think that has also caused officials within the government, as well as the Welsh Government ministers themselves, to think more broadly about the impact of their decisions on wildlife in the country and biodiversity.
Brilliant. Thanks, Darren. So what do you think is the best way to deal with public opinion regarding grey squirrel management to protect red squirrels, or to kind of try to reintroduce them? And are you having any conversations with voters about the need to manage grey squirrels for red squirrels?
It's interesting you asked that question, Kay. I have had a few emails over the years from people who have noted my interest in red squirrel conservation, and of course I've tabled a few questions on grey squirrel action plans and what the government is doing in order to control grey squirrel numbers. And the emails that I've had in from members of the public sometimes haven't always been supportive of controlling the grey squirrel population, because, as those who are listening will know, it often means that you have to trap grey squirrels and then kill them in order for them not to be a problem. And to many people, that is inhumane. They don't like the idea of trapping wild animals and killing them. But of course, there are increasingly interests in other ways of controlling the grey squirrel population. And I know that there has been talk of the introduction of effectively contraceptive contraceptives in their food, in order to stop them reproducing, so that doesn't cause the big growth in the population that there is. There's some concern about the impact of that on other wildlife if they eat the food. So still some work to go in making sure that this is a safe and effective way. But I think that if the public really understood the conservation efforts, they'd appreciate that these are an invasive species. This isn't their home traditionally. The red squirrels are the ones that we need back in the open, because that promotes other biodiversity when we're living in balance with other British and Welsh wildlife. And I think the public, when you explain to them, they are persuaded of the need to control grey squirrel numbers. They want it done as humanely as possible. They don't want suffering to any animals. Neither do I, and neither do other conservationists. So I think the ongoing work that's being done with the potential use of contraceptions is a very effective way, I think, in the future for the control of grey squirrels in Wales. We don't want to be killing animals if we can help it.
No, certainly not. And yes, like you say, our fertility control research work with APHA will hopefully provide an alternative and non-lethal method with the contraceptive and the species-specific feeding hopper as well, to ensure that nothing else gets it. But there's also that conversation to be had, I suppose, around the damage to trees, which is particularly happening in England and Wales, where you have high populations of grey squirrels that are bark stripping the young trees that we're trying to plant for the future. I think Darren might have frozen. Natasha, has Darren frozen for you as well?
Yes, he has frozen. Give us 1 minute. Sorry
Yes,
about
thank
this.
you. That's okay.
I don't know what happened there, Kay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think you know on twice, but that's fine. We'll just have. Oh no, you're like, that's how it's working. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, I was just saying around the having the conversations around around the impacts that grey squirrels are having on the wider environment, on you know on the trees, and then the knock-on impact on the biodiversity that those trees would have supported, and carbon sequestration, which is particularly bad in Wales with the high numbers as is it in England.
It is, and you know the Welsh government has embarked upon an ambitious tree planting programme across the country, and of course one of the worst things you can have hanging to a tree, stripping it of its bark, causing it problems as it tries to grow and get strong, is grey squirrels. You know they are a big problem, and again you know when you talk about the problems that invasive species can bring because they upset the balance in your sort of local biodiversity, I think you know people, as I say, do accept those arguments. They do understand those arguments, and that is why you know I haven't met a great deal of resistance about the need to control grey squirrel numbers.
Mm. And what are you or the government doing to incentivise and enable grey squirrel management for landowners or managers or?
Well, there's a grey squirrel action plan. Some would say it could be more effective. Some would say you know there ought to be financial incentives to eliminate greys from people's land in a different way. But you know, it largely involves either shooting grey squirrels or trapping grey squirrels, and then, as I say, you know, killing them. But that plan, I think, will change as these more humane opportunities come forward with the you know the grey-only feeders and the contraceptives that we mentioned before, and I think that you know what we do need is to be constantly reviewing those action plans to make sure that they're fresh, make sure that they're up to date. We don't need to rewrite them in full every time we look at them, but we do need them to be a live document, if you like, that can change as the science changes and as we find other opportunities to help control the greys. So, you know, I mentioned earlier on the pine martins as an opportunity, and of course the research is still going on into the use of the pine martins in the longer term, but they do seem to be having a positive impact at the moment, and so you know that's another natural way, if you like, of dealing with these pests, the greys.
Yeah. I sit on the Wales Squirrel Forum, which is led by Natural Resources Wales, and at all of the meetings, you're kind of looking at the actions within the plans, with the red squirrel plan and the grey squirrel plan, and seeing what's been progressed and what's been achieved.
Yeah, that's right. And remember, you know, if we don't contain the grey squirrel population, if we don't, you know, try and nudge it further back, you know, we'd be in a real pickle in Wales. This conservation work that's going on in 3 main places in Mid Wales, Clwyd Forest, and Anglesey, you know, it can be significantly set back very, very quickly. You know, there was an outbreak of the Squirrelpox virus on Anglesey back in 2021, and over the course of that outbreak, you know, it could have been up to 70% of the population there that was wiped out. So, you know, you can see how quickly the balance in these populations can change dramatically just from one grey having the virus and passing it on to another very sociable red squirrel that passes it on to others. So we've got to make sure that we do our best to keep the greys under control. So yes, I mean, it is good. The dialogue is good between government agencies, conservationists, in order to try to keep those documents live. But you know, they've got to be sometimes more frequent dialogue, sometimes robust dialogue in terms of what conservationists are asking for. I'll say this, one of the things which I think is difficult for conservationists, particularly when most of the resources that they might have come from government agencies, is people don't like to bite the hand that feeds them, if you like. That means that they don't like to be too critical of their friends who are giving them the resources to get on with the job. And that, I think, is where people like the politicians can come in. You know, I'm not beholden to a wallet from Natural Resources Wales or from a wallet from a minister in order to try and toughen up some of these approaches. So that's why writing into ministers, tabling written parliamentary questions, having oral questions in the Senedd can just help to nudge things in the right direction sometimes if the conversations break down. But be bold in the questions that you guys ask. Be tough negotiators. Make sure that you lay it bare in terms of the importance of the work that you do. And that's whether you're involved in red squirrel work or anything else.
Definitely stress the importance, yeah. Is there anything you, as a species champion for red squirrels, can help to ensure that local groups and environmental charities receive the support and funding they need to continue the essential work they do for red squirrel conservation?
Well, of course there is. I can lobby for government resources, as we just mentioned now, and I often do. I can try and promote partnerships between different organisations. So sometimes, Kay, it never ceases to amaze me that there are organisations that don't always know about one another, and there are funding organisations that don't know about conservation work which is going on, which they could easily invest in. Sometimes conservationists don't know how to approach not just government but local authorities, grant-making organisations, even town and community councils that might have an interest in their work. So there's a whole host of organisations out there that are able to unleash resources into conservation work if they're only given the opportunity to be made a little bit more aware about the work that's going on. Now, of course, finding money can be difficult. It can mean an awful lot of hours that teams spend on trying to get grants in rather than actually doing the work that the grants require of them in terms of the conservation work that needs to be done. So what we do need is, when grants come in, they need to be more sustainable. They need to be a longer term grant rather than a sort of simple one-off where we chase money every 3 years and you lose expertise towards the end of a grant because people aren't sure about their jobs and roles. So lobbying for those things, trying to make sure that people are aware of funding opportunities, trying to make sure that funding is sustainable, they're the things that I try to focus on.
Brilliant. Can grey squirrels be added to the Prevention of Damage by Pests Act 1949 to make local authorities responsible? I'd not heard of this.
That's a very good question. The answer, Kay, is I don't know. But after today's webinar, I will certainly go away and explore that. Obviously, one thing which is strange now that we have devolution is that the law can be different in England versus Wales and Scotland. So it may be that the law is already different on that front here in Wales, but it's certainly something I can look into. And if there is a problem, and if we do need to add the greys, then we can try and lobby to get them added.
That's great, Darren. Sorry to add to your workload.
Right.
Then how far has the red squirrel pox spread? So Squirrelpox virus, what's the issue? What's the situation with it in Wales?
Yeah, so obviously we've had some outbreaks, as I mentioned earlier on. 2021 was a particularly difficult year on Anglesey, where we lost around 70% of the red squirrel population there because they contracted it, and the only place they could have contracted it from was from a grey that managed somehow to slip through the net onto the island. We do know that since then we've had another confirmed case of squirrelpox. Periodically, if people find a red squirrel, it's really important that if it's got the signs squirrelpox. It looks a bit mutilated, almost like leprosy. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's really important that they report it, so that report it to organisations like Red Squirrels Trust, Red Squirrel Accord, so that can be tested to see if squirrelpox is present. And when you if it is found to be present, then obviously that means that some dedicated work, focused work in that area where it's found needs to be done. So there was a case at Treborth in the Botanic Garden in Bangor fairly recently in November, and unfortunately that was a red squirrel that had contracted squirrelpox. I'm hoping it stays this side of Anglesey in order to protect that very important reservoir of reds that we have over there. I'd rather not see it at all, though, Kay, which is why, let's get these things reported as and when it's seen.
Yeah, definitely. And if people see it, and is there also advice around kind of taking in feeders or regularly cleaning them and not kind of allowing that kind of grey-red cross too much?
Yes, absolutely, Kay. And they're all important things that people need to do. Obviously, if a red squirrel is going to the same feeder as a grey squirrel, then there's always an opportunity for them to pick up bugs that they wouldn't otherwise encounter. So, yeah, really important that people are vigilant. That if they're in an area where reds occasionally visit, that they do their best to keep them away from any greys that might venture there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not sure if this is a question around kind of potential grey squirrel management on other people's land, but how can people identify woodland owners? Is there a database?
Well, I'm pleased to say that there is a database, and the only reason I know this is because I had a constituent ask me who owned a piece of woodland fairly recently, and we had to try and track the owners down. But there's a website. It's called llysaggoedwig.org.uk. It's very Welsh, so I'll try and put the information in the chat, or Natasha will on my behalf.
Thank you.
But that is that particular site gives an overview of the first person to contact if there's an ownership query, including local authorities across Wales, National Trust, and CADU sites. And it usually is possible to track down the owner fairly easily of a piece of woodland in Wales. It's not too difficult.
Brilliant. There's a question here around people refusing to accept the need to manage greys and covertly releasing greys that they've saved. And it seems to be difficult to get agencies or people to take action on these groups. And is there anything that can be done?
Well, first of all, I'd encourage you to report that to those agencies, or if you can't do it to the agencies themselves, then get in touch with your local elected representatives like me or others with an interest in this area in order that we can take it up. I have to say I haven't come across reports of that kind in Wales. I'd be very disappointed if it is going on, because obviously that's setting back conservation work that taxpayers are funding, including the silly people that might be re-releasing greys back into the wild. So it's very counterproductive. It shouldn't be happening, and if it is, I want to know about it and where it's taking place, and to find the culprits.
Great, so definitely report it.
Yeah, definitely report it, and please, feel free to send me emails.
Brilliant, thanks, Darren. How could people get involved in either red squirrel conservation or grey squirrel management, do you think?
Well, they can certainly get involved in volunteering with the Red Squirrels Trust Wales, or local groups like the Clwyd Red Squirrel Trust. They'll have fun, they'll meet new friends, and they'll be able to see the fruits of their labours. I always love going to the Clwyd Forest to have a walk around. It's particularly exciting when you go around and you see the cameras that have been set up by volunteers, which are then checked by volunteers to see what they have recorded, and those volunteers then have the opportunity to see newborn red squirrels. They see young red squirrels, older red squirrels that they have been able to help. So So definitely, getting involved in red squirrel conservation work, they'll meet some great friends that they'll make for life, and have an opportunity to help the local environment as well, which is a huge, big tick. They, of course, can also get involved in grey squirrel management too. And usually that sort of management is, tougher work in many respects because of the nature of it. But it's very, very important. And, it might be less sexy, if you like, than breeding some reds and releasing them into the wild. But it's nevertheless, the key, one of the keys to the success that we've seen here in different parts of Wales. So, get volunteering. It does you good, gets you out, and helps to give you a fulfilling life.
Definitely. And I guess there's also things around public awareness raising. Obviously, you do a lot of advocating for red squirrels and talking to people about it. But I guess people, if people are out and about, they can also talk to people about red squirrels, conservation, grey squirrel management and things.
They can. One of the things I always try to do, Kay, whenever I visit any of the conservation work that's going on is, I get my staff to take a few snaps, and we issue local press releases for the newspapers to pick up and stick it out on Twitter and social media, other social media, and put it up on my website. And I always make sure on there that we encourage people to get involved in the work, volunteer, donate, go along to an event to find out more. So it's a positive way, I think, to try and engage people in the conversation. And of course, if anybody posts anything on social media these days, they'll get feedback, negative and positive. So you can have the conversation. You can try and educate people. You can tell them about opportunities to get involved. You can talk to them and educate them about our native species and the work that's going on, and the need to change the law, and the need to sign petitions and do all of that thing. And I think that's part of the success. I mean, the social media stuff that went on over the weekend because of Red Squirrel Appreciation Day was great, because many people on their timelines, for the very first time, we've been reading about red squirrels, and we've clicked on a link or clicked on a picture to try and find out more. So so the more that we can do to mark things like Red Squirrel Appreciation Day, to mark the conservation work with press releases about successes, press releases about setbacks, to have this ongoing dialogue and conversation, the better.
Yes, and there's a lot of evidence and research out there now that can be shared as well from people like Craig and others, which is also really useful.
There is, and that research is accessible. It's not difficult and too academic. Fortunately, you've got experts like UK, you've got experts like Craig that are able to convey that research in a really accessible way. And we know what works. We know what doesn't work as well, because we've had many years in this game, and we know what needs to be done in the future in order to continue to help this native population prosper.
There's a question that's just come in. Are you aware of adenovirus and the damage that this is doing to other wildlife, like the mice, and knock-on effects to birds of prey like owls, kestrels, and even the loss of adders with the mice being wiped out? The greys spread this as they move into new areas.
I wasn't that familiar with adenovirus, no, and I'm still not. I still don't really understand a lot about its impact on other species. But certainly, when you bring an invasive species, they're going to be a problem not just for the ones that they are the species that they're a direct competitor with, which in this case is our friends the reds. But they're also going to be a problem for other animals too. We see that with invasive species like crayfish, don't we, in our rivers, and the way that they have just boomed in population and are causing all sorts of problems for all sorts of wildlife. So, look, we need to keep native species, support them as much as possible, and keep out the non-natives. And the more we do that, the more our ecosystems, the more our biodiversity will be in good balance, and we'll get on well.
Definitely, and that's what we need, more resilience, don't we, in our nature, definitely. Thanks to Natasha, who shared the website for the database. I just shared that with everyone on the chat. I think we're coming to the end of the questions, but are there any key Red Squirrel messages for people watching this webinar that you just want to highlight, or any final kind of words?
Campaigning works. Okay, so encourage people to be vocal, to get the support of friends and families if there's a local issue which needs to be addressed. It might be the felling of an important woodland, which is habitat for red squirrels. And if you're involved in conservation work with other animals, if you've got an important habitat, fight tooth and nail to protect it, from unnecessary development. Make sure that you are very, very vocal. I think, don't just bother with government agencies. Government agencies, remember, don't like to get involved in politics. They like to be above the political fray, and that means that they don't like to be super critical of politicians that sometimes might have to make decisions. So go straight to your local elected representatives if you've got something that needs to be done. If you've got an issue that you want people to change, if there's a piece of legislation that will protect the animals that you care passionately about, contact your local elected representative. And remember that petitions really can work. So try to understand how decision makers make their decisions and what influences them. And if you can do that, then you can influence those decisions directly and have an impact for good or bad on the things that you care passionately about.
Definitely, it's about kind of committing your time and your energy, isn't it, to making these things happen.
It is, and also try and work collaboratively. Get alongside others who may not have a direct interest in the thing that you're campaigning for, but nevertheless can add power to your elbow. There's strength in numbers, and I think when organizations come together as a collaborative in order to ask for change, it often is much easier to make progress. So I'd say, the beauty of what's been happening in the red squirrel world, if you like, in Wales over the past 5 years, really, 7 years, say, is that we seem to have made more rapid progress because things have snowballed. More people have become aware, which has given them an interest. The campaign has started. We've tried to work smartly together, and people know that I'm the Red Squirrel champion. So that if there's an issue that they care about, they'll get in touch with me, and that means I can try and do something about it. I can be the voice for the voiceless red squirrels in the Senedd, shout up for their cause, try to establish what the right way is to address concerns. So yeah, definitely work collaboratively, speak to elected representatives, and don't give up with these campaigns. Don't give up, because it's persistence that makes a difference. There's the story of the persistent widow in the Bible, who's knocking on the door of the judge at midnight, and he says, "Oh, go away," and doesn't bother getting up. But she's so persistent that eventually he gives her the justice that she wants. So you can that shows you can even get someone who's corrupt making a decision in the right way if we are persistent. So be persistent, don't quit. It will pay off in the end.
That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Darren. The Red Squirrels are very lucky to have you as their champion in Wales, I think. And I just want to express my thanks to you for taking time to join us and share your enthusiasm and support for all the red squirrels in Wales. And thanks to you and others such as Craig. I think their future certainly seems to get brighter all the time. Thank you to everybody as well for joining us both. For anyone interested, we have an online Pine Martin conference coming up on the 3rd of March, which will include a look at work in Wales, and further information is available on the events page of the UK Squirrel Accord website. So please join us for that. Have a lovely rest of your day and hopefully see you all again soon. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.